So with the organization of large-scale empires, we see this volume of long-distance trade increase dramatically. Much of this trade results from the demand for raw materials and luxury goods. Land and water routes become the basis for this transregional trade, communication, and exchange networks in the Eastern Hemisphere. Many factors, including the climate and location of the routes, the typical trade goods, and the ethnicity of people involved, shape the distinctive features of these routes. Here you see in the northern part of this map, you see the land route of the Silk Road connecting, China and all the way to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. In the south here, you see the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean is pretty significant, mostly because of the knowledge of the monsoon winds that carried traders from India and East Asia in the spring south to the east coast of Africa. This creates significant interaction between the African cultures, the Bantu cultures, and the Arabs as well as Indian and East Asians, and creates new communities that we'll look at in the post-classical period, and also as well as the African city-states on the Swahili coast. This monsoon winds would then carry them back in the fall northeast, back to India and East Asia. The trans-Saharan routes are also starting to develop in the classical period and intensify quite a bit in the post-classical. The major goods traded in Africa were gold and salt, and as well as the Mediterranean sea lanes. These at the beginning of the classical are carved out by the Phoenicians, trading their rotten murex snail-based purple dye, which symbolized power and was adorned by royalty and used for tapestries. And still you would see this in Roman Catholic garments still worn today, depending on the season. In the Aegean Sea over in the east, the Greek, the Athenian traders and merchants carved out those sea lanes and up into the Black Sea. Now this is a camel with a saddle. This is something that we can't take for granted. This is one of the things, this technology and the domestication of these animals and the hybridization of these animals that we'll discuss in the next period, is something that's really critical. It's how these far-flung networks were able to traverse such vast distances. This among other things. But for example, the stirrups, right? Stirrups, the earliest evidence of stirrups, another thing that we can't take for granted, is from the Kushan people who ruled northern Afghanistan, which was approximately the 1st century CE. At first, it was a solid bar, then a loop of leather to support the rider's big toe, and finally, a device of leather and metal or wood supporting the instep. The stirrup gave riders far greater stability in the saddle, which itself was, in all likelihood, an earlier Central Asian invention. Using stirrups, a mounted warrior could supplement his bow and arrow with a long lance and charge his enemy at a gallop without fear of impact. Without fear of the impact that his attack would push him off his mount. Far to the west, the stirrup made possible the armored knights who dominated the battlefields of Europe. We'll get into that more in the post-classical. And this also contributed, like we'll look at in the post-classical, to the superiority of the Tang cavalry in China. This is a Arab dhow ship. They typically had long, thin hulls. They were trading vessels. You would see these in the Indian Ocean, primarily used to carry heavy items like fruit, fresh water, or other merchandise along the coast of eastern Arabia, the East Africa, Yemen, and some parts of South Asia. The sail design is called the lateen sail, and it's this triangle sail, particularly designed, in concert with the knowledge of the monsoon winds. These two stimulated the exchanges along the maritime routes from East Africa to East Asia. Alongside the trade goods, the exchange of people, technology, religious and cultural beliefs, food crops, domesticated animals, and disease pathogens developed across far-flung networks. You also have new ideas about irrigation, right? The spread of crops like rice and cotton promote this. From the cotton from and rice from South Asia to the Middle East promote these new irrigation techniques. The Canal System is a water management system used to provide reliable supply of water for human settlements and irrigation in hot, and arid, and semi-arid climates. The Canal System, as you can see, is based on these vertical and horizontal shafts. These vertical shafts and were used not just in the construction but also in the maintenance of these horizontal channels. The horizontal channel carried the water from the water table, protected by the land above it, the earth above it, to the outlet where it was used and dispersed for watering these water-hungry crops like cotton and rice. Now, what's interesting is, this is hot, arid, semi-arid climate, so you could imagine that it protects, the water's protected underground from evaporation. Okay. Another issue was the spread of disease pathogens, and the plague of Antonine from 165 to 180 A.D. was an ancient pandemic brought back to the Roman Empire, they think, by troops returning from campaigns in the Near East. It has been suspected to have been either smallpox or measles, but the true cause remains undetermined. This disease broke out again 9 years later, according to the Roman historian Dio Cassius, and caused up to 2,000 deaths a day in Rome, which was about 1/4 of those who were infected. Total deaths have been estimated at 5 million. This disease killed as many as 1/3 of the population in some areas and devastated the Roman army. In the wake of the decline of the classical empires, both Buddhism and Christianity expanded rapidly. So, when you think of the end of the classical era, match that with the rise of Buddhism and Christianity as major world religions. One reason for their growth was the onset of plague that devastated classical populations, as well as political instability, which turned people inward in a search for spiritual solace. Hinduism also changes as it spreads throughout the subcontinent in South Asia. Syncretism, this blending of the old beliefs with the new beliefs, was common as Christianity and Buddhism simply added local traditions to their dogma. Some common characteristics of Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism include emphasis on inner devotion and piety, a stress on spiritual concerns over secular, better life in the afterlife, and a response to political instability and poverty. Many of these things are really important. The technologies, the domestication of animals, the trade routes, the new ideas, the religions, the world religions, and patterns of empire development, rise, maintenance, collapse, crops, biological things, pathogens. This is all setting up a foundation for you to better understand how the post-classical comes to be, and how that third wave of civilization that we'll look at with the Muslim caliphates and the Mongolian khanates develop new forms of political systems. The medieval Europe's feudalism, as well as the Japanese feudal system. All of this depends on your or will rely on your knowledge of what's happening economically, socially, and politically at the end of the classical as we transition into the post-classical.